This is a section that I like to refer to as fun with measurements. On this playlist, you're actually going to get to see a lot of different things that we use measurements on, anywhere from land to the size of a house or something to that effect. So there's going to be some memorization you're going to have to do here, and we'll hit on that, but these are just representative questions of what you might want to be prepared for. So notice this first question here. Buyers purchasing a lot that is 10,890 square feet. What would be the acreage of this lot? So really what we're talking about here is a conversion problem. How do we convert 10,890 square feet? In other words, what part is it of 43,560 square feet? Now, if you have not yet memorized how many square feet there are in an acre, it is going to be worthwhile to do so, just simply because usually when we're talking about land, we deal in terms of acreage, and you may or may not have to convert it to square footage. In this case, how many 10,890s are there in 43,560? And the answer, when you type it into your calculator, is no doubt it's going to be 0.25, and that's the answer to your question. What would be the acreage of this lot? It would be a quarter of an acre, 0.25 acre. Continuing on the theme of what it is that we can do with measurements. Notice in this case, what we're doing is we're making you work a little bit to figure out what the number of acres are. So in this particular case, the property is 100 feet wide and 150 feet deep. Sometimes if it helps, draw yourself pictures. 100 times 150. 150. Okay, and then you can finish it up if you want to. Obviously, that's not drawn to scale there. I was just doing it quickly to help me slow down and think. How many acres are there in this tract of land? Well, if you remember that the formula for area is length times width, or in this case, width times depth, 100 times 150. The area of this tract of land is 15,000 square feet. Okay. And then the question is, what part of an acre is 15,000 square feet? It did say, yeah, how many acres? So we're converting it to acres. Remember 43,560. And then, of course, when you do the math on that, 15,000 divided by 43,560, make sure that you get that number correct and punch it correctly into your calculator. And it is 0.34 acres is the answer to that question. And you see that's there in D. And here's another interesting question that we can do with the measurements. Notice in this case, it tells us that a tract of land contains 22 acres. If 12% of the property must be set aside for roads and greenways, how many 8,900 square foot lots can be created? So roughly what we're looking at here is how many of these can I get out of this? Well, notice that these two numbers can't really talk to each other because one is in square feet and the other is in acres. So my strategy on this is to go ahead and convert everything to square footage just to make sure that we have compatible relationships. So 22 acres times 43,560, remembering, of course, 43,560 square feet in an acre. Therefore, in 2 acres, there are 958,320. And you say, well, what is that number? That's the number of square feet in 22 acres. Okay. So now here's the next part of this problem is that we can't use all of this property. So of the 95,000, let's say 958,320 square feet, we have to set 12% aside. Well, if we're setting 12% aside, does that make sense to you that we're using 88%? I want you to look at that number right there for just a moment. 88% is just simply 100 minus the 12% that we can't use because we have to set it aside because the city has said so as uh, part of their land maintenance and land ordinances. So therefore, we can actually only use 843,003, what's that last number? 321.60. Okay, so now the picture is becoming clear. Now that we know how much usable square footage we have, 843,321.6 divided by how many of these can we get out of that? And again, don't worry too much about the shape of the land or anything like that. We're not trying to trick you on this problem. It's just designed to be a multi-step problem. Now, here's a final trick. If you want to know what the trick is in this problem, here's the final trick. Notice that the answer comes out to be 94.76, but this question asks how many lots that are this size can be created. Well, 94 that size can be created, and then it looks like there's about 3/4 of another one that size. Well, that doesn't count. So this is one where rounding doesn't come into play. You have 94 lots that size, and then the rest of it could be set aside to go with the greenways and things like that. So the answer to this problem is actually A, not B. Okay, it's a good little question. It's multi-step, and that's going to be the complexity that you might see on the exam. Continuing to play with numbers on this, notice what we're doing to you in this case. We're taking the same deal again, the acres, you see how much those are, and then the road frontage of 300 feet. Now, in this problem, again, we've got numbers that aren't talking to each other, so we have to make them compatible. Now that you've seen me do one of those, I just make it a pattern. Whenever something is in acres, if it makes sense, I go ahead and convert it to square footage. 43,560 square footage in an acre. So 4.38 times 43,560 equals 190,000. I just punched that into my calculator. 190,792.8. Okay, now that's how many square feet there are in this particular tract of land. Well, now what we have to do is figure out if the road frontage is 300 feet, what we're trying to figure out here is how much the depth of this property is. So if you want to draw it out, it would look like this, 300. And then, of course, what we're looking for here is X. And we know that the total in here was 190,792.8. And so if you remember your T-bar formula for this, area is length times width. Well, the area in this case is 190,792.8. And we know the width of this lot is 300. And we know the rule of the T-bar. So we're simply going to divide that 190,000 number divided by 300. And you will find out that the frontage on this case, I think it says round to the nearest whole number, the number came out to be 635.98 or something like that. So obviously we'll just simply round that up. And the answer will be 636. And you see that that is B.